Okay, so Thailand, right. We all have that postcard image, beautiful beaches, smiling faces. But what about the stuff that doesn't make it onto those postcards?
Exact.
The stuff that's happening just beneath the surface.
Like military coups
Censorship,
and a fight for democracy.
that rarely makes the headlines. That's the Thailand we're diving into today.
And we're doing it with Wesley Gibbs's book, Eyewitness History of Thailand, 2010-2017.
Right, because Gibbs was actually living and working in Thailand during this period. He's giving us that firsthand perspective, which honestly is what makes this deep dive so fascinating, so insightful, and frankly disturbing in parts.
He doesn't hold back.
Yeah.
For example, he calls the 2014 coup a bloodless coup, which, when you consider what he reveals, is incredibly chilling.
Okay, hold on. I need to stop you right there.
Sure.
What do you mean by reveals? What actually happened?
Well, Gibbs was there. He claims there were up to 60 worker deaths during those protests leading up to the coup. He even calls out journalists for omitting those deaths from their reports,
Right.
like specific journalists from prominent outlet, for example.
That's huge to miss a detail like that, or well, to omit it. It makes you think who benefits from this carefully curated version of events, right?
And that's precisely what Gibbs digs into. He says that Western companies, especially those who profit from cheap labor in Thailand, have a vested interest in keeping things quiet.
Right, keeping those protests out of the news, maintaining that image of stability.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's back up a bit. What led to this 2014 coup in the first place? What was going on?
This was years in the making. Basically, you had this power struggle brewing between the elected government, often seen as representing rural interests,
Okay.
and the more traditional power structures, the military and the monarchy.
And Gibbs is seeing these power dynamics firsthand, right, as this is all unfolding.
He describes this palpable tension in the lead up to the coup. He talks about then Prime Minister Yingluck Shinawatra's party and this bill they proposed.
Right, the one to grant immunity to her brother, former Prime Minister Saksin Shinawatra.
Yeah. That move really ignited a firestorm of opposition from pro-military, pro-monarchy factions.
So you've got this power struggle already simmering, and then the election itself becomes a major point of contention.
Exactly. And Gibbs argues that the election was manipulated. He claims that 6 southern provinces, the ones known for their pro-military stance, they didn't report a single vote.
Kidding?
And on top of that, polling stations were shut down by terrorists, allegedly backed by, you guessed it, the military and the monarchy.
So wait, he's saying the election was rigged from the get-go?
Pretty much. And it gets worse. He points to the Election Commission, which, according to Gibbs, is appointed by the monarchy.
Oh, wow.
This raises some serious questions about how fair and transparent that electoral process could be, in that environment.
That's a chilling thought, to think that an institution designed to uphold democracy could be used to, well, to undermine it.
Right.
So the coup happens, the military takes over. What does life look like for everyday people under their rule?
It's not pretty. Gibbs describes a climate where any form of dissent is met with swift and often brutal consequences.
He names names too, right? He talks about specific people who dared to challenge the regime.
He does. One of the most striking examples is the assassination of Se Dang.
That's right, he was killed during an interview with the New York Times.
Yeah, while he was talking to the press.
That's insane. It's a blatant attack on free speech.
Absolutely. And it wasn't limited to high-profile individuals either. Gibbs talks about activists like Janu, whose own family members were jailed.
On trumped-up charges.
Yeah, insulting the monarchy.
Wait, what are lese majeste laws? I've heard that term before, but...
Basically, these laws, which are unique to Thailand, make it illegal to criticize the monarchy in any way.
So you could be jailed for just expressing your opinion.
Pretty much.
Wow, that's intense.
Yeah, and the fear of those laws, combined with a very real threat of violence, created this atmosphere where people were afraid to speak their minds.
Right, even to whisper their discontent.
Ex-
It's like this chilling effect on free speech, on any kind of open dialogue.
Right. And Gibbs felt it too. He talks about this constant self-censorship, even among his Thai friends and colleagues.
So everyone's walking on eggshells, basically.
Yeah. He describes it as this invisible weight, this constant pressure to conform, to stay silent.
It's hard to imagine living under that kind of pressure, that fear.
It was a very real part of life in Thailand at that time, and it went beyond just silencing dissent, like actively silencing it. Gibbs argues there was this whole system in place.
Okay, so we're talking about something bigger than just the political crackdown here.
Way bigger. He uses this term, neo-colonial gulag. Basically, he's saying that Thailand under military rule was operating like a colony. you know?
Yeah.
serving the interests of the U.S. and Western corporations.
That's a pretty serious accusation. Does he, like, back that up? What leads him to that conclusion?
He points to a few things: the sex industry, exploitation of labor, the lack of any real worker protections. He even compares it to colonial Kenya.
Right, whereas the Kenyan writer Ngugi Thiong'o describes it, economic power was used to control and exploit the local population.
Exactly.
So he's drawing a parallel there. It's not just about Thailand's internal power struggles. It's about this bigger system of like global inequality.
Exactly. He says that Western companies, especially those in industries like, say, electronics, automobiles, they were drawn to Thailand for its cheap, and I think this is important, intimidated labor force.
Intimidated meaning they were too afraid to speak out, ask for better conditions for fear of, well, facing the consequences.
Precisely. And he gives this one example that always sticks with me. He talks about meeting this guy, the head of quality control at a Western digital factory.
So a skilled job.
Oh, absolutely. But this guy, he was living in a one-room apartment with his entire family.
Wow.
Yeah, it really highlights the disparity there. You have these Western executives profiting off this system while the people actually doing the work are struggling to survive.
So what's the solution here? What does he propose?
Well, he definitely doesn't let Western governments off the hook. He's pretty harsh in his criticism of the U.S., for example, for not doing more. He even includes this photo in his book.
God, photo.
Is the U.S. ambassador posing with this, like, notorious Thai ultra right-winger, a staunch monarchist.
Yeah.
It's pretty damning.
It speaks volumes, doesn't it? This whole idea of like turning a blind eye to human rights abuses when it's economically convenient.
Exactly. And he argues this complicity goes way back, like all the way back to the Cold War.
Really?
Yeah, he claims the CIA was actually involved in propping up the monarchy in Thailand as a way to counter communist influence in the region.
So they were willing to overlook what military coups, human rights abuses, all in the name of like geopolitical strategy.
Yeah, that's his argument.
Yeah.
And then, of course, you have the whole thing with the CIA torture centers in Thailand during the War on Terror.
Right, which just adds another layer to this already complex and troubling relationship.
It's a tangled web for sure.
Okay, so we've got political oppression, economic exploitation, international complicity. But I want to bring it back down to earth for a moment. How did this all play out in the everyday lives of Thais?
Well, this is where Gibbs's own experiences as a teacher in Thailand become really insightful.
Mm-hmm.
He was really disturbed by what he saw in the education system there, particularly the use of corporal punishment.
Right, he talks about witnessing young girls being beaten for being late to school.
Yeah. And he's careful to point out it's not just about the physical punishment itself. He connects it to this concept called poisonous pedagogy, which basically means that these authoritarian teaching methods create obedient, unquestioning citizens.
So it's like they're using these harsh punishments to like crush any form of critical thinking from a young age.
Exactly. And he really pushes back against anyone who tries to dismiss this as just Thai culture or whatever. He says that kind of cultural relativism is dangerous because it allows us to ignore human rights abuses.
It's easy to fall into that trap though, right? Like, oh, it's a different culture, we shouldn't judge. But when does cultural sensitivity become complicity?
That's the question he's asking us to grapple with. He's saying, look, human rights are universal. We can't just turn a blind eye to abuse because it's happening in a different part of the world.
And that leads us to a topic that's often considered, well, taboo even. The monarchy. It's something that's not often discussed openly, but Gibbs doesn't shy away from it.
Not at all. He dedicates a good portion of the book to really dissecting the monarchy's role in Thailand. He challenges that, romanticized view that a lot of people have.
What kind of things does he reveal? What's his main critique?
Well, he quotes King Bhumibol. Apparently, he once told the Dalai Lama, quote, "Military governments are good for developing countries," end quote.
Wow, that's quite a statement.
Right? And Gibbs uses this to illustrate the monarchy's stance on democracy, or their lack thereof. He's basically saying that they were willing to align themselves with these authoritarian regimes.
And he also brings up the 1976 Thammasat University massacre, right? Where pro-democracy activists were attacked.
He does. And while the details of the monarchy's involvement are still debated, Gibbs uses it as an example of how their image as this benevolent force was, for many, shattered.
And then, of course, you have the lèse-majesté laws we talked about earlier, which make it almost impossible to criticize the monarchy without facing serious consequences.
Right, so there's this constant threat hanging over anyone who dares to speak out.
And Gibbs doesn't stop at the political aspects either. He also digs into the monarchy's economic power. He's arguing that they're not just this symbolic figurehead, but a major economic force in Thailand. So he's painting a picture of an institution that's deeply embedded in every aspect of Thai society, the politics, the economics, the culture. And he's arguing that this power is often used to, well, maintain the status quo, even if it means silencing dissent. It really makes you think about all those glossy images we see of Thailand, right? And Gibbs is like forcing us to look beyond those, to confront some really uncomfortable truths.
Right, and one of those is the situation in Eisen. He talks about this region being subjected to, like, systematic terror by the military and the monarchy.
Okay, right. He calls Eisen an economic colony. Can you unpack that for us a bit? What exactly did he witness there?
Well, first we need to understand what Eisen is, right?
Hey.
Because it's often overlooked. This is a region that makes up like a third of Thailand's population.
Wow, a third.
Yeah, but it has this unique cultural and historical identity that often gets kind of swept under the rug.
Okay, so remind us, why is Eisen different?
So Eisen was actually part of Laos up until the 19th century when Thailand annexed it.
Ah,
So
Yep.
the people there are ethnically Lao.
yeah.
And, despite attempts to, like, Thaify them, their culture, their language, it's remained distinct.
So they're almost like this internal minority within
And
Thailand.
in a way, yeah. And Gibbs argues that this makes them particularly vulnerable to exploitation. He says that Eisen is basically treated as this, like, economic colony of Bangkok, providing cheap labor but not seeing any of the benefits.
He gives some pretty stark examples of that in the book, right? Like so many factory workers, construction workers, even people in the service industry, they're all from Eisen.
Exactly. And he connects us back to that idea of Western complicity, right?
Right.
Because he's saying Western companies, they benefit from the low wages and the lack of worker protections in Eisen, just like they do in other parts of Thailand.
And he even calls out celebrities on this, right?
He does. He's pretty critical of celebrities, like when he talks about Jay-Z and Beyonce vacationing in Phuket.
Yeah, I remember that.
And he links that to, like, the human trafficking that happens there and the fact that that region is a political stronghold for the ultra-right wing.
It's that thing where, like, we don't often think about where our tourist dollars are going, you know?
Mm.
Or for celebrities where they're choosing to spend their money, what it says, what it supports.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And Gibbs wants us to be aware of those choices,
Yeah.
right? To look beyond those, like, Instagram-worthy beaches and see the bigger picture.
This whole conversation has been eye-opening, to say the least. It's
Yeah.
easy to get caught up in the beauty of Thailand, the food, the culture. But Gibbs, he forces us to confront these darker realities that, frankly, we can't afford to ignore.
Yeah, and he does it in a way that's, like, impossible to dismiss.
Yeah.
He's not just throwing statistics at us. He's sharing his own experiences, his observations, the stories of people he met along the way.
Right, so it becomes very personal, very real.
Exactly. And this is important. He doesn't offer any easy answers.
That's true.
I think that's one of the things that makes this book so powerful. He's not giving us a, like, 10-step plan to fix Thailand. He's simply presenting us with this really complex picture of the country's political landscape, the entrenched power structures, the ongoing fight for democracy, for social justice. It's a lot to grapple with.
It is, but it's so important to be aware of these issues, to be having these conversations, especially now with everything that's going on in the world. And, we've just scratched the surface here. This deep dive has been illuminating, but it's just one perspective, one lens through which to view this complex country and its history.
Exactly.
So to our listeners, as you continue to explore and learn about Thailand, and I encourage you to do so, seek out diverse voices, listen to the Thai people themselves, and engage critically with the information you encounter. That's how we can move beyond those surface level narratives and truly understand the complexities of this fascinating and, frankly, very troubled nation.
Well said.